Hey YouTube, Peter here. I'm reading a really interesting book right now. It's called Hard Times by Studs Terkel. And I'm sure some of you probably have heard of this book. It's quite a famous book. It's an oral history of the Great Depression. And as I've been reading through it, I've been sort of bookmarking some chapters. You know, it really gives you a good idea of what things will be like in the future. And you know, there's just some really good quotations in here. I'm going to read through some of them, and it gives you a lot of insight. It says, this quotation here shows like how dangerously close the entire system was to collapse back then. Roosevelt saved the system. It's trite to say the system would have gone out the window, but certainly a lot of institutions would have changed. We were on the verge of something. You could have had a rebellion. You could have had a civil war. The street was against Roosevelt. Only me and Joe Kennedy, of those I know, were for Roosevelt in 1932. I was Assistant Treasury of the Democratic National Committee. I did not support him after the first 2 terms. I had a great argument with him. I didn't think any man should serve any more than 2 terms. I was getting a little tired too of all the New Deal things. When I asked to work with the War Production Board in 1940, he delayed initially my employment paper. Later on we had rapprochement and were friendly again. Confidence ended the Depression in 1934. We had a recession in 1937. People got a little too gay in the way up, and you had to have a little leveling off. The war had a great deal of stimulus in 1939. A depression could not happen again, not to the extent of 1929, unless inflation went out of hand and values were behind true worth, which you can see happening right now. A deep stock market reaction could bring a depression, yes. There would be an immediate government action, of course, a moratorium, but in panic, people sell regardless of worth. Today you've got 20-odd million stockholders owning stock. At that time you had probably 1.5 million. You know, remember this book was written in the 60s or 70s. So, you know, you can imagine how much higher that number is now. At that time you had probably 1.5 million. You could have a sharper decline now than you had in 1929. Most of the network of people today is in values. They haven't got it in cash. In a panic, values go down regardless of worth. A house worth $30,000 the minute you have a panic isn't worth anything. Everybody feels good because the stock they bought at 50 is now selling at 80, so they have a good feeling, but it's all on paper. Pretty interesting. Okay, next quotation. Do you think a depression of that depth could come again? I think it could, but it would behoove the federal government not to let it come, because you're dealing with a different breed of cat now. If they really want anarchy, let a depression come now. My 16-year-old son is not the person I was at 16. He has many responsibilities, and he doesn't want any shit. When I was 16, I wasn't afraid to die, but the kid 16 now is not afraid to kill. It's true, right? You see it happening. Gang violence everywhere. Different society now. People just don't have the same moral compass that they used to. This is about the coal mining. The coal industry was hit in 1926 and never did fully recover. Coal and lumber. They was the 2 things hit hard. There was a dip in 1919. It picked up some. But in 26 there was another one. Coal and lumber never did recover. 1929 is when it hit banking and big business. But we had suffering and starvation long before that. In the early 20s, mines shut down. Nothing for people to live on. Children fainted in school from hunger. Long before the stock market crash. What was the spirit of the people? Oh, they was ready for revolution. A lot of businessmen expected it. The government sent out monitors. They had them in the Hoovervilles, outside the town, along the railroads, along the highways, and monitoring these places. They got a lot of information. The information was revolution. People were talking revolution all over the place. You met guys riding the freight trains and so forth, talking about what they'd like to do with a machine gun, how they'd like to tear loose on the rich. You don't find much political talk anymore, working men. You go to a tavern now, it's all ball games, something like that. Seldom over politics or war. The old Cracker Barrel discussions we had at home, always lively. Kind of interesting. He shows like how they've dumbed people down. You know, people don't, the average person is just so dumbed down on sports, drugs, Prozac, TV. You know, they don't have any kind of consciousness of what's actually going on. Okay, this is, there was some of this in the 30s. Wait. The past depressions fell in the same category as earthquakes and bad weather, an active providence of God. I don't think there'd be the acquiescence of the 30s. I think there'd be a rebellion. I think even in the suburbs out here, you'd get a rebellion. Exactly what they'd do about it, I don't know. I think there'd be a vigorous and ultimately violent insistence. If not my measure, then some other measure. Something ensued. There was some of this in the 30s, the left wing. Some were called communists. Some were communists. They pointed up, as they called it, the contradictions. People starving, with farmers being told to kill off pigs. There was anger and frustration with the inability to put the productive capacity to work to meet the needs of the people. There wasn't much of this talk in the 30s. There were the nuts, the fringes. They wouldn't be the fringe today. Again, you know, they're talking about how it would be so much different now. How there could easily be a revolution. And there almost was back then. Not that I've heard about that in the history. They sort of like put that under the carpet. Do you think a depression will ever come to America again? I don't know. I've been told it can never happen again. However, there is one thing that does trouble me. I went to Germany in 1934 and 38. I saw what Nazism did. I was troubled by Americans saying, but this could never happen with us. The Germans are a strange people with whom we have nothing in common. Beasts. I knew this wasn't true. This kind of thing can happen any place, given certain circumstances. There was a terrible depression in Germany. Along comes a man who tells them they're a great nation. All they have to do is believe in themselves and follow him. He promised them the sun, the moon, and the stars. The German intellectuals and comedians made fun of him, and the Nazis in their nightclubs. I heard one in the Platz in Munich. The audience loved it, adored it, but it didn't stop Nazism. They won over the lower middle classes. The depression overwhelmed us. Yes, it was terrible, but we had hope. This is not going to kill us. I don't think people can say that nowadays. If a depression came now, I'd be afraid, terribly afraid. So he's saying that, you know, it could be easy for Nazism or some form of fascism to come into America, given the depression-type circumstances that we're experiencing now. I truly believe we will have another depression. I think people will just go out and take what they need. I don't think there will be any more people queuing up on bread lines waiting to be fed by charity. God damn it, I'm not condoning this, but we've let it happen. Take the television. It isn't food they're hungry for now. It's a different kind of food. Not only the Negroes, all the poor. I mean, just look at Black Friday at Walmart, how people are willing to kill for junk, you know, and then when they really need food, what's going to happen? What do you think would happen if there was a big depression today? Very simple. They commit suicide today. I don't think they're conditioned to it. We are a hardier race then. We'd win wars. We didn't procrastinate. We'd win them or lose them. Today we're a new race of people. They'll quit on a draw. If they see any feasible way to see their way out to quit with any dignity, they'll quit. Back then you had a different breed of people. You got $21 a month going into the Army or Navy. So them guys, they went to win the war. There's been an emancipated woman since the beginning of the war also. In the 30s then, the individual con man, the heist man, had an easier time with it all around. Oh yes, and this is like coming from a major criminal con man gangster. Oh yes, it was much easier then. The federal government now has you on practically anything you do. They make a conspiracy whether you accomplish the matter or not. Today it's fraught with much peril. Any type of endeavor you engage in a nefarious matter, it constantly comes under the heading of a federal stature. The federal government then collected taxes and just a few interstate things, as white slavery, and that was about it. Today the federal government has expanded into every field. If you use a telephone as an example, and you put slugs in it, that's a penitentiary offense. Strange as that may seem. So that will give you an idea how far the federal government has encroached on a citizen's prerogative. You know, and remember again, this is in the 60s. Look at how far we've come since then. If another depression came, the first ones out of work would be people like me. There's a whole sub-society of people like me We're the ones who open doors and give a bit of polish to things. We're a luxury. We're not really functional. And there are many of us. Except for teachers and nurses, most female college graduates are in this dispensable category. And most men nowadays too. There are lots of women doing this agency kind of thing. Ad agencies, social agencies, being somebody's secretary and not working very hard. There certainly couldn't be anything like us if there weren't an affluent society. Basically saying, there's a lot of people that are employed that, especially in the government, that really have no need to, their job is not really that necessary. If we had a severe depression today, I'm basically an optimist. I don't think this country would survive. Many people today are rootless. When you have this rootlessness, we're talking about the Germany of the 20s. You'd see overt dictatorship take over. You would see camps. We used to talk a great deal about keeping solvent and the morality of not going into debt. I was almost 30 years old before I went into debt. And look at how different it is now. As soon as you enter college, you have student loans, credit cards. The war economy is not helping the farmer. No, it's not. Not the small farmer. He's getting the worst of it all the time. You never see a war help the farmer except temporarily. Much as I hate to say it, the Second World War did end the Great Depression. I think we solve our problems by killing our boys and others. But I can see a depression ahead right now. If we go to pot, I would make a depression today would cut deep, quick. Today in the machine age, like everything, it would be sudden. In the 30s, my sister's family lived on our own production. They had gardens, they had eggs, they had flocks of chickens. Now the eggs are all produced by the large establishments. Machines turn out thousands of dozens. Then they had their own and were more self-sufficient. Today the milk is supplied by the same company that supplies the dining room here. They didn't have money to buy new clothes or cars or machinery, but they had enough to keep body and soul together. Today the money would be gone. They wouldn't have food. People today have been taught violence, the denial of humanity under money pressure. People are going in that direction. I don't think they tolerate these conditions that we came through. The younger people wouldn't take it because they know it isn't necessary. But you can't have a lot of people in Congress that you got today. Again, reiterating that people just turn to violence. They're not, they can't sustain themselves. I mean, they've lived their entire lives getting things from the supermarket, from welfare. They have no idea how to survive on their own. If such times were to come again, it would not be the same. Our discontents today are more vague and ill-defined. At the same time, we have an apparatus of police controls that would develop into a kind of American fascism. It would not be the European style. I think the New Deal saved the American capitalism. It was a bridge, but it never really solved the problems. Well, just still reading it. Just wanted to give you some insights. Very interesting book. Again, Stud Terkel's Hard Times. Highly recommend it. A real first-hand account from many different normal, ordinary, working people. What actually happened in the Depression. And it's just that was a small depression compared to what we're going to go through, but it can give you a little indication of what the conditions would be like and how people were thinking and, the hardships that they endured and how you can prepare for that. So, check it out if you get a chance. Thanks.